everybody. It's so good to see a packed house in this third talk of the day here in this room at Sutton House. My name is Victoria and I'm your compere today. And now it's my absolute pleasure to welcome Jess Crowe, who's a local resident and is going to be talking about the history of Hackney through homes and houses. So please give a big round of applause to Jess.
Thank you. Thanks very much. And I hope this is interesting. It's sort of endlessly fascinating for me because I live in this house. But hopefully it's interesting for other people as well, because it does tell us a story about how Hackney has developed over the last 150 years. So I'm going to talk a bit about the land, who owned it, who built on it, and what happened to get it into being built. A lot about the residents and their stories, and then some themes that tells us about how Hackney has evolved through some common themes that emerge through these stories, stories around family, stories around death, stories around disaster, and how people have coped with all of those things. And then a bit about the detective work. So if you feel like this is something that you might want to do for your house, it's absolutely something that anybody can do. So these three maps just show a bit about Hackney's development over the first part of the 19th century before our house was built. As you can see, Hackney is very much open fields. You can see on the left, the little village of Hackney with its 12,000 residents in 1800. You can see then gradually the houses encroaching from the south and the east and gradually being built up, and this sort of massive expansion of population as Hackney moved from being a village to being a suburb of London. And by 1858, you can see that our house has been built, because our house was built in 1853. It was actually firstly known as 7 Blatherwick Cottages, which gave us some confusion, because, well, what a weird name. How does anybody possibly come up with that? But I have found that out. So we were 7 Blatherwick Cottages initially. From 1878, it was renumbered. There was a whole renumbering and renaming of streets, and so it became 32 Lavender Grove. But as you can see, it was all very very gradual, this development, and so that the western end of Lavender Grove was built up to Malvern Road by 1858, but the rest of it was still all of those market gardens. And the 1868 map shows a little bit more about how it was done in little parcels of 2 or 4 or 8 houses. You can't really read the notifications, but the names of all of those little developments are corroborated by some of the surviving plaques. So 1 to 9 Frederick Villas, you can see up there, became 2 to 18 Lavender Grove, and then 1 to 8 Blatherwick Cottages is now 20 to 34 Lavender Grove. So we were number 7. So that was when it was built, but who actually owned this land? So Lavender Grove was part of the extensive Rhodes family estates in Hoxton, de Beauvoir and Dalston. You can see there on the left their farm over on the western side of Kingsland Road. Their farm in what's now de Beauvoir, and that was they were originally tenant farmers. They gradually bought up land from the 2 main local landowning families, the de Beauvoirs and the Tysons. They became they suddenly got out of farming into more profitable things, brickmakers, builders, landowners, and then obviously obscenely wealthy imperialists, army officers and colonisers. So good for them. The William, Thomas and Samuel Rhodes converted their father's farming leases. So Samuel Rhodes was the original tenant farmer. These brothers converted the farming leases into building leases and gradually built out, as you can see. And then on the east, this is a map from one of their many complicated legal inheritance documents showing how it was divided up. So the green coloured streets were the property of Thomas Rhodes, and the yellow ones were the property of William. So they were Yeah, so they wanted originally, they had very grand plans for developing on the de Beauvoir side, but they ended up in this very lengthy legal battle with the Benyon de Beauvoir heirs about the development of that side. And in the end, they lost that. And so they really focused only on building out what was originally called Lamb Farm. You can still see Lamb Lane is still there on the other side of London Fields. It was 140 acres of land that was bought by Samuel from the Tysons in 1789 for £5,250, quite a lot of money in those days. And so they did this gradually. They built out, they leased little plots to developers who built out 2 houses, 4 houses, 8 houses, carefully controlled specifications, common pattern books, very tightly managed timelines. A developer had 6 months to build on their leased land. The Rhodes then sat back and collected the ground rent, and the leaseholders then would then let out the houses to tenants, and they then might collect subtenants as well. So some of the plots were kept and then managed and leased out by the actual builders. That doesn't seem to be the case with the Blatherwicks. They were just investors, so they bought the land off the person that built it. We don't actually know who built the house, which is disappointing, but I haven't been able to find that in the records. But the freehold was retained by the Rhodeses. It eventually came down through their labyrinthine family inheritances to Cecil Rhodes, famous Cecil Rhodes' brothers, Elmhurst, Arthur and Bernard, plus Rhodes trustees. There was a big Rhodes trust set up to manage all of Cecil's vast wealth. And they eventually sold the freehold to somebody called Harry Burgess in 1926. He came from quite humble origins. His father was a ship's clerk who died in Calcutta. But George did well. Harry George did well in his property transactions and was able to move to Highgate, and died in 1960, leaving over £3 million to his widow. So he also did well from his properties. And at some point in the 20th century, I don't know exactly when, the resident at that point was the first resident to actually own the property. So it was this very complex system. I won't spend too long on this, but just say the Rhodeses were an extraordinary family. I thought a diagram might help a little bit to try and explain this, because they all had the same names as well, which was really unhelpful. So Samuel bought it. He left it. They divided his inheritance by lots between these 3 brothers. The second Samuel actually got out of the business, and he stayed in brickmaking and didn't get into building. He sold his shares to Thomas and William, who then parcelled it out between their 3 male heirs, so William Arthur and Francis William, and Thomas, another Thomas over on this side. But William Arthur's and Francis's sister married her cousin, and so eventually William Arthur, who didn't have children, left his share to Thomas William. So you'd think that Thomas William would be the person that inherited everything. That doesn't seem to be the case. Somehow, at some point, it all came to Francis William and then down through the Rhodes Trust, because they were clearly good at annexing land. So that you can see this. There's a very frustrated legal extract from the family's lawyer who was trying to unravel this. And he, in 1926, I think, as part of these sales, he says the abstracts do not show, even by way of recital, how the said Reverend Francis William became entitled to the whole of the undivided moiety of William, nor do they show any title to any other undivided moiety. I have little doubt but these matters can be resolved, but of course they must be. So you can sort of feel his frustration at trying to unravel this, which I also feel. So because, of course, by this point, it wasn't only the Dalston estates, it was all of Cecil's other wealth. Nathaniel Bridges is the person who's the sort of long-standing Rhodes family lawyer, and he basically kind of manages this trust for them all. And there are these fabulously named people who are also trustees who are referenced on our family deeds. The Honourable Walter Lewis Baghot, Theophilus Basil Percy Levitt, and Sir Otto Bite. And these were all Rhodes trustees, so they all had a share in the house at some point. So the ownership and leases of 32 Lavender Grove really exemplify how London was built. This system where everybody, from the owner of the land to the leaseholder to the developer to the tenants and even the subtenants, everybody had some kind of financial interest. The landowner, as I said, would lease a plot of land to a builder who would raise a mortgage. They could then develop it, and then newspaper advert for some other Lavender Grove properties shows the benefits that were being advertised. They're all let to excellent tenants. The attention of investors is especially called to these properties. The houses being of a size and class that will always readily command good tenants. So these were, things that would bring in a steady income, and this was really what the Blatherwicks got out of it. So this Rhodes model was followed by all the other landowners, as I say, was really how London was developed out. The Blatherwicks, this is the middle document is an extract from one of the Rhodes rent accounts, and the Blatherwicks were therefore paying the Rhodes £26, 2 shillings a year for the 8 properties there, 1 to 8 Blatherwick villas. It's actually cottages, but villas in the record, and each tenant. And the document on the right is a valuation list from Hackney Borough Council showing the value of the property. So each tenant was paying the Blatherwicks £32 a year for their rent for this. So they were getting £256 a year and only paying the Rhodeses £26. But they had to maintain the properties. It was their responsibility as lessees, and not everybody was very diligent in doing this. And you probably can't read this, but it basically is a letter from the managing agent to the Rhodeses saying the position is most unsatisfactory because the lessee is collecting rents from the tenants, but on the other hand is failing to complete the repairs and declines to pay the ground rent, and we recommend that action should be taken. So there was some pain in it, but basically it was a very nice source of income for everybody at every stage, really. Oh, sorry, no, not quite. What do we know about the Blatherwicks? I think the original investor was Lucy Blatherwick. So as a woman, she gives her occupation in 1851 as a land proprietor, and her sons and grandsons then carry on just sort of collecting the rents from the tenants. They were basically businessman family. They had a shop, a hosier's shop, so they sold stockings and socks in Bishopsgate. Matthew branched out into being a tea dealer, but basically they just had this sort of sideline of extra income coming from their properties, and did quite well. They moved up to Enfield, and Herbert Charles Blatherwick managed to become the honorary secretary of the Enfield Rifle Club, so he was clearly a very eminent person. So by the 1930s, though, the estate agents, Donaldsons, were gradually replacing these one-off small investors as owners in the valuation lists, and also more sitting tenants were gradually buying up their own property, and probably won't be able to read it there, but you've got one of the properties on Lavender Grove. You can see the owner and the occupier are the same person, and that person has also managed to buy the house next door to him. So it was gradually becoming a bit more fragmented, if you like, in terms of ownership. So that's the building, the land. What about the people who lived here? So it divides into sort of roughly 50-year chunks, this timeline. John Reitman there is the first name. He was there for a couple of years, but rather frustratingly, although he's the first name, I know literally nothing about him. Couldn't find him anywhere. There wasn't any. There were some John Reitmans in the censuses, but they didn't feel like the right sort of people. So that's all we have is a name. The first family we've got any detail on is the Furners, James Furner, master ironmonger, and his wife, 6 children, a widowed sister-in-law, and a servant girl. Now, our house isn't that big, so there's a lot of people living there, and this is a pattern we'll see throughout. But they were there in the 1861 census, and then by using other documents like birth certificates and very useful street and trade directories, been able to sort of extend their tenure either side of the census. And that's what I was able to do basically with all of these names. The census is a really good anchor point, gives you lots of information, family relationships, and you can then track backwards and forwards and try and fill in the gaps. So and I've managed to fill in most of the gaps, although again, we've got some where all I've got is a name. So Thomas Hinks, Thomas Smithers, David Pickering, they're kind of boring common names, so very difficult to track them down. But a number we have found a bit more. So who were these people? What does it tell us about Hackney? They were, drapers, pub landlords, accountants. Hackney was a very comfortable middle class suburb, convenient walking distance from the city. According to Charles Booth's poverty map, it was pink, fairly comfortable, good ordinary earnings. So it sounds pretty good. Although, as we can see, this could change rapidly as people's fortunes rose and fell, often affected by the waning economic, waxing and waning economic fortunes of the city. A lot of them had city business connections. The population was really mobile. These tenants, they came from all sorts of places outside of London, Buckinghamshire, Peterborough, Hertfordshire, Wiltshire, all over the land. But then, as now, very little traffic between north and south of the river. We've only got one South Londoner, Horace Phipps, born in Battersea. So once they were here, once they'd come to London, they tended to move around the same neighbourhoods: Hackney, Whitechapel, Islington, Clapton, Tottenham. They didn't really stray far, which is obviously very wise. And families really stuck together. See that throughout all of the records. They were there together. There were family businesses. There were same trades being carried on by father and son and daughter. And they moved around together. So they really stuck together and helped each other out. And the other thing is there were pubs everywhere. I mean, the records just show there's a one constant. It's a really nice thing to see. You see these pubs and you go, I recognise that name, that's still there. And they were often the first things that were first buildings built as these developments gradually evolved. And they were places obviously for the builders to go and get some refreshment, but also the developer would sort of set up shop there, and it would be where the builders would go to get their wages weekly. And I read that in one of my sort of research books, but actually it's completely verified by the fact that when we were excavating our cellar, we found this bottle labelled the Duke of Richmond, which anybody that knows Queensbridge Road will know is just up the road from our house. So is absolutely borne out by this fact. Yeah, we found it buried in the foundations of the house, so which is, I think, really, really nice. So let's meet some of my neighbours from the past. So the first story I want to sort of give is really how financial disaster could see lives turned topsy-turvy really, really quickly. And the Furners and the Flints, two early families, really illustrate this. So James Furner, as I said, he was a freeman, he was a liveryman, he was a joint owner of two ironmongers down in the city. He was doing really well. But he went bankrupt in July 1866, and he doesn't ever seem to have really recovered and had his own business after that. He was then a commercial traveller for the rest of his life. Samuel Flint, whose story is there from a newspaper of London Gazette in July 1866, he came from a family of embroiderers in Marlow in Buckinghamshire. He had a draper's business, also bankrupt in July 1866. He moved to Tottenham and became a commercial traveller, but he does seem to have recovered better. He managed to open up his own business again in embroidery. He eventually moved back to Marlow, built the family business there, and became a Freemason, which is the ultimate symbol of respectability. And so I asked my father if there was something that could have made these things happen all these bankruptcies happen in 1866, and he immediately said Overend Gurney, which was basically the Lehman Brothers disaster of its day. It was known as the Bankers' Bank. It collapsed from dubious financial investments, and there were business failures across the land, as you can see from this slightly over the top. A great commercial panic, the like of it never seen before, but obviously seen subsequently. So James and Samuel could well have been victims of this, and their financial fortunes really affected by that big national crisis. As indeed could our next family. The Goodricks, they had a business in Liverpool. You can see there that Liverpool is one of the places where a host of houses were failing, and he lived in Liverpool until something triggered a move to London. So the Goodricks, really enterprising, and these sort of, I think this really epitomises this mobility, labour mobility of the era. Francis and Harriet Goodrick were born in Peterborough. They're Draper's family. They married in London, but their first two children, Kate and Salome, beautiful name, were born in Peterborough in the 1850s. By the 1860s, Francis is running a draper's shop in Liverpool. By the 1870s, he's moved to Hackney and he's a warehouse man. I thought this was a symbol of a sort of a bit of a decline in fortune, that he'd had his own draper's shop and now he was, humping pallets around a warehouse. But actually a warehouse man was a sort of middleman between the industrial scale manufacturing and all of the sort of little local shops. So it was more of a middle class brokerage type job. So it was probably a step up. He had two more children born while they were in Liverpool. Francis and Anne. And they're prosperous enough to have a servant in Liverpool, although she was a 15-year-old girl from Ireland, so they probably didn't pay her very much, to be fair. But so they, by 1881, they'd moved out of our house. They were living in Albert Road, which is now Middleton Road, and apparently a further child, Jessie. But by the 1880s, they've moved out of London again. They've moved up to Birmingham. He's changed trades again. He's a gunmaker's clerk. And he stays as that for the rest of his job. And they eventually moved one more time to Warwickshire. The children also move around. Kate moves out. And when I was sort of trying to find out where Kate had gone, I called up the birth certificate of Jessie Goodrick to also find out like when she was born, to see if she'd been born in Lavender Grove. And what that revealed was that Jessie wasn't, in fact, Francis and Harriet's daughter. She was Kate's daughter, and born with no father listed on the birth certificate. So Kate, age 19, has a daughter, but leaves Jessie with her parents, and she and Salome move back to Liverpool. They're working. Kate, I think, probably doesn't have quite a very happy life. She dies quite young, having got married again and had another child. Salome does better. She marries, and they don't have any children, but she runs a successful coffee house in Dudley. Francis goes further than anyone. He actually emigrates to America and has a successful career as a mechanical engineer in New Jersey. Jessie does well, actually. She stays living near her grandparents for all her actual grandparents for all her life. And you like to think that before Kate died, she saw Jessie happily married and settled. But obviously we don't know that. But Hobsbawm described this mobility of artisans as the artisanal equivalent of the Grand Tour. You kind of move to London to kind of experience working in the big smoke and improving your trade. And they were really constantly on the move. They went where there was work. They weren't afraid to try new things. They were supported by their family. Francis, when he's in Birmingham, is apprenticed to his uncle, and his uncle is the gunmaker, who then clearly gives work to his brother-in-law. And so family was really important. And this is also illustrated by our next family, Mary Bundock. She's, I think, probably my favourite resident. She's basically Peggy Mitchell. So in 1839, George and Mary Bundock move from Hertfordshire, Bishop Stortford, and take on a long-standing pub on the Whitechapel High Street, the White Swan, and they run it. And then Mary carries on running it for 20 years after George dies. And I just think, she was a woman managing this pub on probably one of the roughest streets in London in the 1850s and 1860s and 1870s. So I think I wish I had a photograph of her, because I bet she was pretty formidable. But the pub had been there for a long time. It's there on this 1746 map. You can't read it, but it says the White Swan Inn. And that's one of Charles Booth's maps, dark blue, very poor, casual work. So Whitechapel was, not an easy place to run a pub. Two of Jack the Ripper's victims are known to have drunk in the White Swan on the eve of their death, Martha Tabram and Francis Cole, in 1888 and 1891. But luckily, Mary had long since retired to Lavender Grove by then. So she moved in 1872 with a married daughter, Maria, and her husband, Frederick Choate. He was an oil man. It doesn't mean that he was a prospector. Oil and colour men were sort of like hardware stores. They sold paint and other household goods, and sort of like a DIY shop, really. And another married daughter lived next door at number 30. She was already there with her husband, Charles Hilling, and some children. And I think I'd got it wrong and thought that number 6 Blatherwick cottages was our house. And I discovered the Hillings at that point. But then realised we were number 7, so I thought, well, that was a bit of a waste of time, but it turns out it wasn't a waste of time. It was quite good, because it gave a reason for why Mary had retired there, so she could be near her daughter and grandchildren. So that's really nice. So, and by 1881, there's another Bundock son, Edward, who seems a bit hopeless, to be honest, but he's also living in Lavender Grove. He's an out of work, an out of business oil man, having tried and failed to run a pub himself. So that's the Bundocks, all gathered in Lavender Grove. But sadly, by 1884 and 85, tragedy strikes, and 3 of them die within the space of a year. Mary Bundock, Mary Ann Hilling, and Francis Choate, Frederick Choate, Maria's husband. They all die, and Maria moves to Portsmouth Portsmouth, where there's yet another Bundock daughter has moved, and she remarries a house painter. Hapless Edward follows her and eventually gets work as a house painter, thank you to his new brother-in-law, as does Maria's son, Frederick Choate, who was born in our house. And so by the time of World War II, all the two Choates, Frederick Jr. and his wife and their son, who becomes a teacher and marries another teacher. They're all living together in Portsmouth, continuing to support each other. And I think Mary Bundock would have approved of that, because, as they say on EastEnders, it's all about family. Family. It's all about family. So our final resident, absolutely our most disreputable one, Horace, the South Londoner. We were able to follow Horace quite a lot through the papers, because he's quite often in the news, not usually for good reasons, but he had a very colourful life. Born in Battersea, son of a porter and a waterman, who dies of smallpox when Horace is really quite young, only 5. And although his mother's still alive at this point, she evidently couldn't support her children, because Horace is sent to an orphanage. So in the 1871 census, he's in Spurgeon's orphanage in Lambeth, which sounds dreadful, for the destitute and fatherless. But it's not quite as grimly Oliver Twist as you might think, because Mr. Spurgeon was a preacher and organised it on reasonably humane lines. But still, it must have been pretty awful for little 5-year-old Horace. So by 1881, he's embarked on his pub career. He's a pot boy at the Norfolk Arms in the Strand. He graduates to a barman, where his first appearance in the papers is he's in a fight with somebody, where is it? Yeah, so he gets married in 1884, and then by 1885, 86, he's already running his own pub. He's only 25, running the King's Head in Leather Lane, where he's sued by one of his staff for not paying their wages. He's then connected to another 4 pubs all around London as a licensee, a landlord, including 2 in Hackney, both sadly demolished, during which time he lived briefly in Lavender Grove. The late 1890s were his most successful. He runs this very splendid building, which is still there, the Swiss Hotel at 53 Old Compton Street. He's moved to Cricklewood, and he's living in an address so prestigious. The next resident was Sir Isaac Gollancz, the scholar. In 1897, he is also a Freemason, so he does well. And then in 1899, it all goes wrong. He goes bankrupt, and he completely disappears from the record. There's no more mention of him anywhere. Fanny, his wife, and 2 of their sons are in the 1901 census, visiting friends in Stamford Hill, and she's still listed as married. By 1903, she remarries, and she's described as a widow, but I have to say I haven't found any record that Horace had actually died. I did find a descendant through Ancestry who told me that the family story was that he'd fled to Sierra Leone. So, why not? From Battersea to Sierra Leone. Yeah, fascinating. And this is the only family who I've got a photo of. But this is Horace, his wife Fanny, the 3 eldest children, Harold William, Horace Walter, and Ethel Mary. And then 2 little girls, Fanny Alice and Lillian Lottie. And I think from the ages of the children, this was basically taken when they were living in Lavender Grove. So that is that's the first 50 years. So huge churn, because people had these very short tenancies. In 1900, though, the Wakeleys move in, and they're basically there for the next 50 years. So Harry Wakeley is another warehouse man, and 4 of their 6 children, two of them have died young before they moved to Lavender Grove. But the others are there. And Stanley Charles is our longest living resident. He basically lives there from when he was 1 till he died when he was 53 in 1953. He was a commercial clerk and later a commercial traveller in windows. So he never married, he never moved out, lived with his mum basically all day, maybe a confirmed bachelor, and lived there most of his life. Despite the fact that there are generally 5 or 6 Wakeleys living there, they also let out 2 rooms and sublet, and that then helps them pays more than half of Harry Wakeley's rent to the Blatherwicks. The Spantons are there for an almost equally long time, and after between the war and 1953, it's basically Minnie Spanton and Stanley living in what must have been quite an empty house by then. The second half of the 20th century it's basically becomes a single family home again. There's us, we're there. But before us, the Halls and the Hugheses were there for most of the second half of the 20th century. Liz Hughes is the first resident to actually buy the house. She bought the house for £3,000. So all Hackney residents see that and weep. She bought that at some point, I'm not quite sure when. It was then sort of flipped when she died in 1999. It was flipped and done up, sold 3 times in 1999 to people that in our family we know as the cheese people, because Anthony Burton, who we bought the house from, worked for Baby Bell. So then they moved to Sevenoaks for the schools. And so we moved in, and you can see it there, our kids going to Hackney schools. So that is the story. And despite that great variety of people, there are some really common themes. And I think, David Olusoga, who inspired me to do all this research, said through the stories of individuals and communities, we can understand these wider patterns of history. And the first one is really about families and illegitimacy. As I've mentioned, Jessie there with these very stark gaps in her parentage, but the average family size, 5 to 6 children, and our families absolutely bear that out. It's estimated that out of wedlock births was around 7% of births were out of wedlock, but actually it was much higher than that. 30 to 40% of brides were pregnant on their wedding day, and that's absolutely evidenced by the experience of our things. We can see that from the dates of marriages and the dates of the birth of their first children, and illegitimacy really common as well in the lives of our families. And the most interesting sort of connection to that is, so this is a picture of Walter Lloyd, who married Ethel Phipps. You saw her photo. He was a herbalist. This is his shop in Portsmouth. And he was an early salesman of contraceptives, and he was in correspondence with Mary Stopes. Unfortunately, he himself had 3 children out of wedlock with Ethel Phipps, because his first wife was still alive, and they didn't marry until after these first 3 children had been born. So he, didn't practice what he sold. The other theme, I think, is death. It's just a much more constant presence in the lives of these families. As you saw, some of the 2 Wakely daughters died, and these I think from probably you sort of can tell the air quality of London during the 19th century, that most of they were basically dying of a bad cough. They were dying from bronchitis, and these little girl babies mostly. The 2 Wakely daughters, those 2 little girls that you saw, the youngest Phipps children, were both dead within a year of that photo being taken, both from bronchopneumonia or bronchitis. So really sad. Working conditions were also really bad. Terrible scene at a fire. This was one of Samuel Flint's properties, where he had probably a sweatshop in Islington. There was a big fire, and some of his employees died jumping from the top floor window to try and escape the fire. Other residents died, and the death of a breadwinner is an absolute disaster for women and children. So you see these women, moving in with their families, getting remarried. When Mary Ann Hilling dies, she doesn't have to. Her husband doesn't have to remarry, because he has an older daughter who stays at home and looks after him for the rest of their life. Sad death of an accountant, always sad. Our most shocking death, James Wigmore, accountant, dies, is knocked over by train at Haggerston Station. And there's obviously the impact of war. So the eldest Wakely son, Harry John, dies in World War I, missing, presumed dead in the Battle of Cambrai. So that's death and disaster as well. I mean, we talk a lot now about the precariat, but there's a really fine line between respectability and disaster. And William Rawlinson's family really illustrates this. From painter and signwriter with his own business, he's homeless in the workhouse, and his son is arrested. You can see in this newspaper article, stealing 4 shillings and 6pence from Dicky Bird's, the confectioner in Tottenham. And he's birched, and he's was homeless and had been sleeping out with a gang in Hoxton. And probably can't see this, read it, but it's a really sad tale of, these are the workhouse records. William Arthur is there he's on remand, he's sent off to court, he comes back for one more night, and then he's sent to this ship in the Thames estuary as a remand ship for homeless and destitute boys, where he learns a trade. But really poignantly, underneath his final entry is his father, William Rawlinson, who's homeless, and you sort of think, well, probably he got himself admitted to the workhouse so he could have one last night with his son. So really poignant. Because of course there wasn't a safety net, and so all these families were just reliant on themselves until there was those things. The basic sources of detective work, anybody can do this. An ancestry.com subscription is really worth it, but you can always use the excellent archives where you can access it for free. All sorts of the General Registry Office is quite exciting because you can call up a digital image of a birth certificate record and it arrives in your inbox 5 seconds later for £3. So I highly recommend that. And the archives are brilliant and helpful, both Hackney and London. And then you just Google and you find these obscure sources. So you do go down lots of rabbit holes, but it will send you to local websites. The Tottenham Summerhill Road website gave me all the information about Dicky Bird's delicious ice cream, health and energy and pleasure, although don't steal money. It'll tell you about all of the trade journals, will tell you about these long lost trades, and tell you more about that. In the 20th century, it's a lot harder because you don't have censuses. So this is the sort of process. If you've got unusual names, that can really help you. Catherine and Charles Hughes, Elizabeth and Charles Hughes, Elizabeth Hall, didn't really, I couldn't find anything about them, but realised that Miles was Elizabeth's husband, and so that got me started. You can then, from electoral registers, you obviously can't tell relationships. I could tell that the Hugheses and the Halls were living together just after the war, but didn't know anything about them. Was then able to do some sort of educated guesses, and you can sort of track them. And eventually, through many records, it'll narrow you down, and then you sort of strike gold. And I was able to find a Charles Hughes who was connected to 32 Lavender Grove, and then that told me, found his marriage register and realised he had married an Elizabeth Hall whose father was Miles. So you can track things through all different sources. It's massively frustrating and fascinating. You have to be prepared to get lost down endless rabbit holes, and I'm sure Jules will be fed up of me going, look at this thing I found. And it's you can find all. You have to try alternative spellings. It took me a long time to find one of the Ferner daughters because Ancestry had transcribed her surname as Turner. Lucky guesses. Records, they were only part of the story, and you can't tell motivations, deceptions, what were people actually thinking. They just tell you the bald facts. So you have to sort of use your imagination. So who was John Reitman? Who knows? Am I going to get any more? Oh, no. There we go. How tough was Mrs. Bundock? I mean, I just really wish I'd been able to find her. James Wigmore's death, the newspaper article was sort of speculating that, well, his brother-in-law was saying, well, he was a bit deaf and his eyesight wasn't very good, and he had been out for dinner with friends, and so maybe he was a little bit drunk. The coroner was very cross that that a letter had been taken from James Wigmore's pocket and given to his widow, and the coroner was like, I should have seen that, but it had been given by the police to his widow. So was he deaf, blind, drunk, or was it a suicide? Who knows? So the records have been sort of slightly hidden away. Jessie Goodrick's father, did she ever learn the truth about who her father really was? The three Ferner daughters is a whole other sort of strand, which I didn't go very, very far down, but they were quite hard to track down, as they partly the spelling, but also they were baptised as adults in these very fancy high Anglican Oxford movement churches. So was it their early experience of their father's bankruptcy and sudden loss of status that drove them into this very kind of high church faith? Who knows? Getting more? Yes. What was Horace Phipps up to? I mean, that's what I really want to know. Did he really go to Sierra Leone? What happened to him? And then Charles Hilling. I mean, this is extraordinary, right? His wife dies. He and his 6 adult children then live in a house in Rendlesham Road for the rest of his life, which is another sort of 40 years. His children never marry. They never leave home. They all work, apart from the eldest daughter who keeps house. What was that about? Was he, what was it like living in that? Was he just grief-stricken and he kept them all close? Was he a kind of crazy Victorian tyrant? We won't know. So that's it. Many thanks to everybody who's put up with me for throughout this research, both my children and father for support, Elizabeth at the Hackney Archives, who's brilliant and helpful, and David Olusoga for the inspiration. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jess, for an amazing talk. We've got a few minutes for questions.
Hello, it's interesting that Cecil Rhodes' father was the vicar of Bishop Stortford, and he was a great philanthropist for Bishop Stortford, and he paid for the grammar school. I think he paid for some housing, and he paid for the church. So a lot of the Rhodes money went to help the people of Bishop Stortford.
The other thing was that the Bunbots came from Bishop Stortford. So I did wonder if that was another connection, but the reason that they chosen to move to Lavender Rhodes because they have some connections to Rhodes is Bishop Stortford.
Hello. I was just interested in how long did this journey take you? I mean, I know you're a very busy lady with a family, and how long did it take you?
I mean, to be fair, I've been doing it all along, but all the time. And sometimes when children were interested in helping and we lots of good research, and sometimes they got less interested in it. So we stopped doing it as a sort of family endeavour. Then there was the pandemic. So I mean, I've probably been doing this before the pandemic, but very much on and off, just as, time and energy took me.
I might have missed the beginning. When did you move in?
2008.
And you bought it?
Yes.
What was the situation when you bought it? Were the council selling it off? Who did you buy it from?
Yeah, so we bought it from the cheese people, and they themselves had bought it in 1999. And you're absolutely right. There was a whole variety of different sorts of ownerships on that street, and our street is still partly owned by London and Quadrant Housing Association. So my assumption is that either the remaining investors or Donaldsons, who bought up a lot of the land, and there was another estate agent whose name I've forgotten, Lewis and Tucker maybe, who also owned a lot of the houses in the area. I think they sold some of them en masse to London and Quadrant, but some I think were offered to the sitting tenants. And so our sitting tenant, Elizabeth Hall, had bought it for £3,000 at some point, and then sold it. She moved and died in St Leonard's care home in 2000, but she'd sold it, and it was then flipped by developers because she sold it for not very much. It was probably in quite a bad state of repair. She'd lived there for 50 years. It was then sold again in 1999 and sold one more time to the cheese people. So and they were there for about 8 years. So yes, there's a whole variety of different ownerships.
So you've done a lot of work on this. How is it going to be saved going forward, and will be with Elizabeth and Hackney Archives, and can other people benefit from this?
I have sort of thought about the idea of writing it up as a little booklet or something. You can keep going because these stories are so fascinating. I could find out more about these people's lives, which I'm sure my family would be really happy about. But yeah, there's a lot to that. I do think, the approach, and as I say, anybody can do it. Go to the archive, log on to Ancestry, look for your house address, and you'll be sent down highways, byways into the past. But yes, I have written up a little bit of it already, so I think that.